Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm really excited to talk about how chronic stress exacerbates ADHD and what we can do about it. And so if you've ever caught yourself just feeling overwhelmed or so stressed out you can't even handle it, or so burned out you can't get yourself to do anything, then this conversation is for you. So let's get right into it. This is a big topic that I'm going to try and just share a piece of it because I know we have ADHD, and if we go too long, we can lose our attention. So today I want to talk about, like I said, burnout, chronic stress, all that kind of stuff. And this is really relevant to ADHD in how it exacerbates our symptoms, but also for the entrepreneur, because I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs that they're feeling so overwhelmed they can't get themselves to do anything, or they just have all these ideas, but they're so burned out they can't bring them to fruition. Those kind of things are what I hear. And those are real problems. And there's a way we can address it. So let's get into it. I want to start by talking about what exactly burnout is, what exactly chronic stress is. To me, stress is anything that brings us into a protective response. And some stress might be like life-threatening and dangerous, and some stress might be not life-threatening and dangerous. But the thing is your nervous system doesn't know the difference. Your nervous system does not know the difference between a tiger chasing you and that project that you've tried a bunch of times and you can't get yourself to do, so now part of you inside is shaming you. It doesn't know the difference between a hater on social media and, a memory of how a parent talked to you that wasn't effective. So what we want to do is have an understanding of this stress, but also an awareness of when we're getting into it, and then be able to do something about it. So there's lots of signs that we're in a state of chronic stress, and I just want to touch on a few of them. Some of us just feel it. We're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. But if you catch yourself saying things like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed out, I'm burned out, then you're experiencing probably chronic stress, and it's important to take a look at. But sometimes it can show up in sneaky ways. Sometimes it can show up through like poor sleep, low libido, especially women. It's like, oh my gosh, no, don't have energy for that. It can show up in poor digestion, like you might be constipated or have, diarrhea, whatever. That can definitely be a sign. Low motivation to do things, which is why I say it exacerbates anxiety, difficulty focusing, feeling scattered. Sorry, not exacerbates anxiety, exacerbates ADHD. Certainly it exacerbates anxiety, right? But specifically exacerbates ADHD. It can look like a lot of things, like big exhales in sighs, or numbing out more than usual by, having a glass of wine every night or more than one, binge watching Netflix or doom scrolling social media. Those are all signs that you're experiencing chronic stress, possibly burnout, and that it's probably exacerbating your ADHD. And I want to get into a little bit how that is. So if you think about it, stress is anything that puts us in a protective response. And so our protective responses are helpful for us. It's important to remember that. Our nervous system puts us in protective responses as a way to help our body survive. This originates in the reptilian brain, which all reptiles even have, as well as mammals. So this isn't new, evolutionarily speaking. So it's a very primitive system. And what it does is, as soon as there's a perception of threat, you've got 3 to 5 seconds, or maybe it's 3 to 5 milliseconds. I can't remember. It's a very short amount of time when your body perceives a threat to figure out, is this actually a threat? And then immediately you're flooded with things like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol as a way to help you get away from this perceived threat, this thing that your brain and and body think is life-threatening. And that's very helpful because, if a tiger's chasing you, you want to be able to get away. Like, it's very important. And the thing is sometimes we're able to get away, and sometimes, I like to switch to talking to the animal kingdom now because it's a little less scary. So if you're a gazelle being chased by a tiger or a cheetah, you're going to fight or flee. And eventually, as a gazelle, you're going to realize on, a deep level that, oh, I can't run this thing. You're going to run out of energy, and you're going to do what they call in the animal kingdom playing dead, which is basically the shutdown response. Your nervous system is going to go into a protective state of shutdown, the dorsal vagal response, where you are limited in your ability to feel emotional and physical pain, among other things. It can look like depression or disconnect, dissociation, numbing, all that kind of stuff. And if you're a gazelle about to be eaten by a tiger or a cheetah, whatever's more likely for a gazelle, it's probably a good thing you're not going to feel it. So again, it's important to understand that these responses are protective. They are helping us or trying to help us survive because that is what these responses are for. But they're not great at discerning. Like, is this actually life-threatening? And so a lot of times when we face stressful situations over and over again throughout our day, our nervous system doesn't know that it's not a tiger chasing us. So we still get put into these protective responses with that flood of all the chemicals. And if you think about it, if you're trying to run away from a tiger, the last thing you need to do is be able to focus on your work. The last thing you need to do is feel motivated to go write that blog post or, start your podcast or reach out to a client and offer something to them. So when you're chronically getting into these protective responses, it's going to be really hard to get stuff done. It's going to be really hard to focus. And you're going to be extra emotionally sensitive because your body is just trying to protect you. And so it's not bad or wrong to get put into these states. But the thing is because they exacerbate ADHD, and really they're not great health-wise, they can eventually, left unaddressed, create chronic health problems, which is a whole nother episode I believe I've talked about on the podcast. But if this isn't addressed, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder over time. And so I want to unpack this a little more about how we work with this. Because yes, there are things we can do to regulate our nervous system. Absolutely. And I will talk about that. But fundamentally, there's something more important than that. And it's shifting how we think about things, shifting about our experience of things, and starting to reduce the stress that we experience. And that is huge. And it is life-changing. Because otherwise, it just can feel like you're playing whack-a-mole with all the crazy stuff that comes on your plate. And it's like, oh my gosh, not this, not this, not this. So what I do in my program with women, Ascend, ADHD Women Entrepreneurs Mastery Program, what we do in there is we help people get really clear on their values, their priorities, the reasons why they're doing this business or, their current purpose in this stage of their life, and start to consider what things actually need to be done and what things just can be deleted, what things can be delegated, what things can be postponed. So that kind of can reduce the stress, but that takes some ability to say no and mean no and not take on extra projects. And we all know that part of the problem with taking on extra projects is with ADHD, we have time blindness. So we're like, oh, I'll just do this real quick. It's not going to take me that long. And then 16 hours later, we're like, oh, crap, what did I commit myself to? Whether it's for ourselves or for someone else. So it's important that as ADHDers, if we want to be able to cope effectively with our ADHD, that we're not exacerbating it with extra stressors. And that starts with being clear on our values and priorities and being able to say no to everything else. Or at least, no, not right now. Or I'm going to say yes to this knowing this isn't aligned, but there's another reason I'm saying yes to it because it aligns with a value I have, right? So I want to get into a little bit more, like that's kind of like one piece of the work, but I want to get a little bit more into our mindset around stress. And part of this is linguistics. Brene Brown did a lovely job. I mean, like, I feel weird rating her work. She's like world-renowned researcher. But her book, Atlas of the Heart, is brilliant. It's like an encyclopedia of all the emotions, and it breaks them down in a beautiful way. But one of the things that she talks about is getting granular about emotions and using the correct language, because there is a neurobiological response that happens with the language we use. And think about that. One of the phrases I hear so often from ADHD women, especially entrepreneurs, but even just women in general, is I'm so overwhelmed. And I want you to notice what it feels like in your body when you say that. I'm so overwhelmed. I noticed tightness in my chest. I just took a deep breath. Because overwhelm is very different from I'm highly stressed and have a lot on my plate. And Brene uses this brilliant example from her time as a server in a very busy restaurant to talk about the difference and why the difference matters. In the restaurant business, when you feel like you have a lot on your plate and you're starting to run behind, that's a state of stress. And they would go back into the kitchen and say, I'm in the weeds. And then that server would say, I need so-and-so to take waters to table 5, dessert to table 2, and greet table 6. Like, I don't know if that's true restaurant lingo. I only worked banquets, so I never worked as a server quite that way, but you get the idea. But in a state of stress, we're still able to function. It's just that we have a lot on our plate and we need some help. But when we are truly overwhelmed, that's our experience, we are not able to do anything. The only response to feeling true overwhelm is nothingness. That's the only way to get out of it, is stopping all work. And so in the restaurant business, they would come back into the kitchen and say, I'm blown. And at that point, everyone knew, okay, this person can't handle anything. They don't even know like what tables they have anymore, because that's how overwhelmed they are. Like, that's how deep the stress is. So they would take their tablet or whatever they had, go to the hostess stand, look at their tables, and they would just take over for that person. And that person was required to go do nothing for 10 minutes and not be in the kitchen or the restaurant. They could be in the freezer, which I guess they were in Texas, so maybe that's a little more appealing than it is to me in Minnesota. But that's important to recognize, because if you're in a state of stress, but you call it overwhelm, your body is going to get into a place of not being able to function because there's a neurobiological response with the word. So it is important not just to look at what's on your plate and get real about what you actually need to do and what you don't, but also to be clear about the language you use when you do have a lot on your plate. If you're truly overwhelmed and you can't do anything, then yeah, that's appropriate language. And then nothingness is your response. Chilling out for 10 minutes, going for a walk, finding a way to regulate your nervous system. That is what needs to happen at that moment. But if you're just stressed and you're using that overwhelm word, it's actually going to make you more stuck. And it actually is going to exacerbate your ADHD. It's going to freak you out more. I mean, think about what it felt like when you said that you feel that way. I still kind of feel a little tension in my chest from that, and I know most of you are pretty sensitive beings like I am, and so we can feel that in our bodies. So the language we use to describe our experience is really important. And what's also important is that we are regulating our nervous system, that we are doing things to get us back into a state of flow where we feel safe enough to rest, digest, connect, and focus and do the work. That ventral vagal state of our autonomic nervous system, so that we're no longer in fight or flight or shutdown. And you've heard me talk about these responses, the fight or flight responses to help you fight or flee. The shutdown response is like all hope is lost and you're giving up. But with your business, a lot of times those states are not particularly useful. But you may have parts of you trying to protect you. And so what I find important is that you're both regulating your nervous system and leaning in and getting curious about what is going on here. Because, yeah, we can regulate your nervous system, but if we're not addressing that underlying thing, it's just going to keep happening. And like I said, it's going to be playing whack-a-mole with the stress and your coping techniques. So this will be a brief review of regulating your nervous system because I talk about this more in depth in another episode. But I want to talk first about the shutdown response and then the fight or flight response. So if you catch yourself in that shutdown response where you're feeling, shut down, numb, disconnected, even dissociative or depressed, maybe even overwhelmed would be the word that gets you there, right? The way to regulate out of that state is any movement at all, or even visualizing movement, or looking out the window. Because at that point, you are immobilized to protect. That's what your nervous system has done. So shifting out of that and showing your nervous system that you're safe requires you to actually make some movement. And sometimes we feel like we can't move, even a pinky finger, that was an index finger. But visualizing movement or looking out the window, or can you get outside and breathe the fresh air? That's enough movement, but then you're also surrounded by hopefully some kind of nature. I know some people live in cities and may not have the best outdoor experience around them. That'll help you regulate out of that response. Then I can list off all the things, you can sit on an exercise ball, you can go for a walk. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do that can get you out of the shutdown response. But what's important to understand is that you only want to do that if it's safe enough to do so. Like if you're, being assaulted and you've shut down, that's not a good time, right? Like unless when you do movement, it's to actually try and flee again. But a lot of times when you do shift out of that response, it'll pop you into your fight or flight response. So we want to make sure you understand how to get out of that as well. And again, only if it's safe enough to do so. Because the fight or flight response is a protective response of mobilization to get you to safety, you need fluid movement with breath to shift out of that state. And so that, can be a yoga sun salutation. It can be my go-to favorite, volcano breathing. I like that one. Any kind of breath work, really. Volcano breathing, you bring your hands together in your heart, you inhale, reaching your arms overhead, and as you exhale, you bring your arms down, around, back by your sides, and back to center. You do that several times. A meditative movement, I love to teach those, which I'll share some in my upcoming 3-day live, by the way, but I love to teach those in my program too. Those are great. I think I said a yoga sun salutation, Tai Chi, but fluid movement with breath is what matters here. And while that can help you get to a more regulated state, there's two pieces I want to address. It's not better to be ventral vagal. It's just that ventral vagal is that safe enough to rest, digest, connect, and focus and all that good stuff. It's just that when we are actually trying to get work done and actually are not in danger, that state is going to be much more productive for us. Our nervous systems were designed to only blip into the fight or flight response or the shutdown response in the face of a threat. But the problem is with chronic stress, and when we say things are overwhelmed, we are overwhelmed, that can actually keep us chronically in the fight or flight response, shutdown response, or bouncing back between the two. The other thing that can keep us in those states or bouncing back and forth is trauma. And you've heard me talk, maybe even ad nauseum by now, about the trauma of growing up and living ADHD in our neurotypical society that does little to accommodate us and instead offers us a lot of criticism, complaint, judgment, and all that for just being the way our brain is wired, requiring us to mask to be appreciated and valued and shown that we're worthy of love. And so trauma is another way that we can end up bouncing back between those states, which is why in my program and even in our 3-day live, I'll share a little bit of how I help people with trauma through trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga and evidence-based treatment for PTSD and complex trauma. And we'll do a little bit in the 3-day live. So if you're curious, I'd love to have you there. But that's another piece of what can get us bouncing back and forth. So we want to address that underlying trauma. We want to shift how we're talking about our stress and make sure that we're prioritizing things. But it's also important to lean in and get curious when we're going into these protective states to see, like, there's a part of me that doesn't feel safe right now. There's a part of me that perceives threat right now. What's that about? It's a great time to grab a journal and a pen and write. It's a great time to go on a walk in silence or with music that doesn't, distract you too much. And to start to get clear on what's really going on that you're in this state. And you might be like, why do I want to do that? Well, one, to not feel like, I don't know, a bucket of crap all the time. But two, to be able to function. And I'm not talking about function like a neurotypical, because that's not possible. We have an ADHD brain. I mean, it is for a while. I mean, I functioned like a neurotypical to some degree when I was masking, but it was exhausting and eventually took its toll when I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression in my early 20s, right? Early to mid 20s. So it's not that we can't act neurotypical. It's just over time it wears on us, right? And puts us in our fight or flight response. And in my mind is traumatizing because we're not even loving ourselves unless we're acting different than who we are, right? So we have all of this together, and none of it is more important. These are all essential pieces to helping us regulate our nervous system and be able to function more optimally with ADHD. Because this chronic stress thing, this unresolved trauma thing, the bouncing back and forth between fight and flight and shutdown as a way to protect ourselves isn't productive if we're trying to build a business. And it doesn't mean that our parts don't come by this honestly. It doesn't mean that, we're bad or that, oh, you should be ventral vagal, ready to rest, digest, connect, and do your work all the time. Like, that's not even possible. But the work that's before us is one of resilience, which is an ability to notice when we're dysregulated, when we're in our fight or flight response or shutdown response. Lean in and get curious about what that is and what needs to happen. And then regulating our body again, our nervous system, to be able to be ventral again, to be able to rest, digest, connect, and do our work. So this is a fast episode. I had a lot of stuff that we went through. I know y'all got ADHD, so probably you're like, finally, she stopped talking so dang slow. But if not, you can always rewind and listen to different parts of it. I want to add one more little piece to this. And this is going to be nobody's first choice. But one of the things that can happen is if we're not releasing this stress every single day that's building up, if we're facing it, it can build up in the nervous system. Those chemicals, the adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol can start to build up and contribute to chronic illness. Not to mention, making it harder to focus with ADHD. And so one of the things that's really important is that we are releasing that energy daily. And there's like 7 ways I talk about how to release that stuck energy from the fight or flight response. But I want to talk about 3 right now and real quick. One is obvious, it's movement, because that's what the fight or flight response is designed for, is to fight or flee. And we're talking like 30 minutes of movement a day. So that could be a 15-minute walk in the morning with your dog and a 15-minute walk at the end of the day with your dog. Could be, 30 minutes of playing with your cat or your kids or whatever you have. It could be dancing in your kitchen. It could be going to the gym. It could be going for a run. But 30 minutes of movement to discharge the stress from the day. So it's not the energy of the stress from the day. So it's not building up and wreaking havoc both on your health and your ADHD, which of course we know are interconnected. Another thing that we can do is shift our attention to our breath. And I say it that way because breathing techniques are amazing, and this is what I'm talking about. But it's important when we are doing breathing techniques as a way to release the buildup of stress that we are in first noticing our breath as it is, and then we invite our breath to shift into whatever technique we're doing. Because otherwise, people tend to hyperventilate, like, oh, all of a sudden I'm supposed to breathe in for 6, hold for 2, breathe out for 6, hold for 2. Like, I mean, that doesn't work for most of us, especially if we're not breathing in a relaxed way. And so noticing your breath and then inviting in a shift can be really helpful. And there are so many good breath techniques out there. You can YouTube it or, whatever. I share breath techniques in my program for sure. There's lots of ways to learn that. But the thing I would say is really shifting into it gradually in a way that honors your body and your nervous system. And the last one I'll share is a good hard cry. Something I hear from a lot of ADHDers that is not uncommon. But believe it or not, it helps because you're releasing all of that stuck energy from the fight or flight response. So a good hard cry actually can help you. And I'm not suggesting you have a good hard cry every single day at the end of the day. That's what the movement and the breath work is for. But this can be a nice way to release some of that stress and recognize that crying isn't bad. You're working through the feelings, but you're also releasing the chemicals from the fight or flight response. All right, y'all. So we ran through this, and I hope you stayed with me. If you didn't, that's okay. You can listen to it again. If the nervous system stuff is heavy, there's an old episode where I unpack it more thoroughly, and you're welcome to listen to that. And if you're wanting to understand some of this deeper work and learn how to overcome these inner and even some invisible ADHD obstacles over and above just the standard ones that we think about, then you're invited to my 3-day live event that starts on April 24th. And we're going to dig in. I'm so excited for it. So the link is in the show notes, and I would really love to see you there so that I can help you overcome those invisible ADHD challenges so you're able to build that prosperous and meaningful business that you love. All right, y'all, if you're not following yet, please follow and check out the registration for 3-day live in the show notes, and I'll see you next time. Take care.